All right, today we're going to be talking about solving equations, which is basically stuff like this, where you have an equal sign, that's what makes it an equation, but then you have stuff on either side, and there's always going to be a variable, a letter that you don't know what it is, and your job is to find out what that letter represents, what that variable represents. Now, the examples we're going to do today are pretty simple. We're going to do more complex ones as we keep going throughout the unit, but you need to know the basics before you can do the hard stuff. So, our goal is to isolate the variable. What that means is that every single question you do, the last step should look like this. Okay? And it should be y is equal to something like a number. Doesn't matter. But it should be that y equals part. And what you'll notice, if we look at just like these two, the first ones, they aren't x equals. There's something with the x. And so our job is to get rid of whatever is with the x. The way that we get rid of stuff is step number one, we do the opposite operation. So for example, if there's adding, the opposite of adding is subtracting. If there's subtracting, the opposite is adding. If there's multiplying, the opposite is dividing. If there's dividing, the opposite is multiplying. You'll see when we get to it. The other thing that's important is we have to do this to both sides of the equation. So if we look at this one, the idea is that this is like a scale. It's my terrible scale. The idea is that an equal sign means that both sides have the same value, the same weight, the same whatever. So this x plus 4 is the same as 10. So if we change something about this side, we have to change this side the exact same amount, or else they won't weigh the same anymore and it will be unbalanced. So let's go through our examples and see what we have to do. So when we look at this first one, okay, we have x plus 4 equals 10. I want it to just say x equals. So I need to get rid of this plus 4 that is with it. So I think, okay, how am I going to get rid of the plus 4? Well, I have to do the opposite. What's the opposite of plus 4? Minus 4. Now, because I subtracted 4 from this side of the equation, I need to subtract 4 from this side of the equation as well, so that it's balanced. So now when I do the math, and if we look at it, the x doesn't change because we're not doing anything with it. This part, plus 4 minus 4, turns into plus 0. You don't really need to write plus 0. It doesn't really change anything. And your goal should always be to get rid of whatever that was. If you didn't get rid of it, you made a mistake. And then over here, 10 minus 4, well, that leaves us with 6. So now when we look at it, x is equal to 6. We found the answer. This second one, same idea. We have x minus 5 is equal to 12. Well, I know that I need to get rid of this minus 5, so I'm going to do the opposite. The opposite of minus 5 is plus 5, and I need to plus 5 to both sides. I really like writing it this way, where we write this second line underneath so we can see what we're changing. That's a good strategy so you can show your steps. So the x doesn't change, this becomes nothing, and this becomes 17. So that's our answer, x is equal to 17. For the next one, it's a little trickier. In this case, we don't have like plus 1 or anything. We actually have a 3 here. And you should remember that when a number is next to a letter like that, that means multiplication. That's the same as 3 times q. But we don't write the times, so it doesn't look like an x. So we have to do the opposite. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So to divide, I'm going to write that. If you'd prefer to write this, that's fine too. It doesn't make a difference. I like writing it as a fraction because that means divide by 3. And again, if I divide the right side by 3, I have to divide the left side by 3. So now when I do this, it's going to end up 3 divided by 3, well that's 1, so it's just q by itself. And this 12 divided by 3 becomes 4. Now, you might have noticed that in this question, the q is on this side of the equation. It doesn't really make a difference. 4 equals q, q equals 4, they're the same thing. So don't get worried if something's on the right side or the left side. I'm even okay with you leaving answers with the q on the right side. Some teachers prefer it to change it, and you should usually change it at the very last step if you're going to change it. Cool. And in this one, we actually have division. So we can see here, we're dividing p by 4. So we got to think, okay, well, what's the opposite of divide? So the opposite would be to multiply by 4. And on this side, we're going to multiply by 4. The idea is, If it instead was 4p divided by 4, it would just cancel out and you would just be left with p. Oops, pink. So we have just p on this side. And then over here we have 2 times 4 gives you 8. And we have our answer. Oh, one more. Sorry, this one's a little tricky. Sometimes when you do questions, you will end up, or you might just get a question like this, where you have negative something is equal to a number. Now, what I want you to understand, this is the same as if there was like negative 1z, okay? This z is not by itself. I want the z to just look like this, to have nothing, no coefficients, nothing. So right now, this is not finished. We have to do more. So what we're going to have to do is get rid of the negative 1. I have 2 ways you can think about this. The first way is kind of cheating. You can just say, oh, I'm going to flip it. So basically what you do is if it's negative, it becomes positive. If it's positive like this 10 is, remember if there's nothing here, it means it's positive, okay? It's going to become negative. That's an okay way to do it. A better way to do it is to really understand what's happening, okay? Over here, it's times negative 1. And like we did in this example over here, when we're multiplying, we have to divide to do the opposite. So over here, it's multiplied by negative 1, so I'm going to divide by negative 1. And I have to divide by negative 1 on this side as well. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 cancels out, just leaves you with z. Over here, 10 divided by negative 1, positive divided by negative, gives you a negative. Okay? And that gives you the right answer. So just be careful about those tricky ones where there's a negative, and just remember that you have to flip the signs, or do this. Dividing by negative 1 works as well. So that's the basics of how to do these types of questions. Just remember, you got to do the opposite, and you got to do it to both sides. So we had adding, so we subtracted 4 from both sides. In this one, we had subtracting 5 from x, so we had to add 5 to both sides. In this one, it was multiplied by 3, so we divided by 3 on both sides. And in this side, it was divided by 4, so we multiplied by 4 on both sides. The common mistake that I see a lot is when students see a question similar to this one. We'll write it right here. Something like this. A lot of students see the 10, and immediately they say, okay, I'll do minus 10 on both sides. Just be very careful and just try and think, what am I trying to do? You want to get rid of this plus 4 that's with the x. If you don't, if you subtract 10, you're going to end up with like negative 6. It doesn't make any sense. Okay? So think carefully and always try and get rid of the number that's with the x. That's your goal. Okay? And that's it.